Okay, so what I have here is just to help get an understanding of the confidence that some of you may have when you are cycling. So we have a spectrum line with one end being I do not feel at all confident when I cycle, the other end being I feel very confident. And obviously this may be changeable depending on the environment that you are cycling in. But what I want you to do is try and use the annotate function on Zoom. So how you do that is you go kind of hover up to the top of the screen, and you should be able to see, I think it says view, and then there should be an annotate kind of button with a pencil, with a pencil icon. If you click on that, then there should be something that says stamp. And if you pick an icon from the stamp, so there's like an arrow, a tick, various things. So I'm going to pick a tick, and then I can annotate that line and stamp across the line how I feel. So if you have a go at that, and we can kind of, yeah, that's good. Let's see them coming in. Super, thank you for sharing that. So yeah, quite a range, and that's great. Some of you therefore will have some ideas to share maybe in this training, and some of you may have some questions to ask. Excellent, thank you. So I'm just going to clear that one now. Okay, so as many of us know, there is lots of benefits to cycling. Being good for the environment, our physical and mental health and well-being. It can save time and money, and particularly with sort of recent travel restrictions and health concerns around COVID, more people have been jumping on their bikes, which is really, really great, and more often. And actually there's some statistics that have come out that it's not always about long distance, but as 2/3 of journeys made by bicycle are less than 5 miles. And we're sort of seeing towns and cities introducing new infrastructure to make cycling easier and more accessible, which is obviously really great to see, and we hope that continues and organisations continue to support and encourage their employees and their networks to be able to cycle. But all those benefits are great, but obviously for some it isn't always an enjoyable experience for various reasons, and that might be kind of confidence around other road users, not knowing the roads, and knowing your rights as a cyclist. You might feel vulnerable sometimes, or sort of the frustrations around heavy traffic. So there's obviously different reasons, but there's hopefully some things that we can practice and tips that we can learn to support people to feel safer and more confident, so that you can start to really enjoy cycling. And when we talk about cycling, it's also trying to remember about the kind of how it is making it accessible, and a sort of inclusive term of cycling. Some of the stuff that I'm just covering is generally what we see as cycling for able-bodied people. But in terms of, we want to make sure that cycling is inclusive for people who are disabled or have other needs as well. So just to get a sense again of where you are all at. So if you share in the chat box where you cycle currently, and maybe where you would like to cycle. So if you are here to become more confident, where are some places that you would like to cycle that you aren't currently? I've spoken to people recently who are very confident cycling around their local neighbourhood and the residential areas, but actually they would like to start cycling into their offices and their workplaces, which are in busier areas. So yeah, there's quite a few of you that seem to be kind of, cycling already around towns and cities. And again, obviously, some of you, whether you're in a town or city, the infrastructure varies compared to where you are in your route. So some of you will have very good cycle paths, some of you may not, and routes. But yeah, generally it seems quite town and city based. Super, good variation. Thank you. Just going to clear some of our annotation again. Okay, now. Okay, so we're getting on to some of the tips here. So some of the things that we can think about before we actually get on your bikes. So before you get on the bike, you might want to, it's always useful to start checking your bike. Make sure it's working as necessary. This will make you feel safe and help with the sort of maintenance of your bicycle and thinking long term. And obviously, Carolus will be covering that in a bit more detail later and giving you some simple but top tips. Some basic things about making sure that the bike is a good fit for you. So making sure it's adjusted to the correct fitting for your size, the saddle, the handlebars. Obviously, bike shops can help you with that if you're not 100% sure what is the right fit. Particularly if you're using higher bikes. I see a lot of people on sort of higher bikes that have their saddle completely the wrong level, and it just makes it harder work. And again, I've seen people kind of buy bikes online, but they're actually way too big for them, and then it makes them feel very unsafe on the bike. So just that kind of basic thing to check first. And also think about the type of bike that you're using for the type of cycling that you're doing. So if you've got an uphill, reasonably long journey that you want to take by bicycle, whether that's maybe commuting into work, it's maybe not helpful having like a really old, big town bike that's going to be quite heavy. It might make you feel a bit more of a struggle and therefore not as enjoyable. Planning your journey before you set off can make you feel calmer and more confident when you're out on the road. So obviously basic things, checking online, speak to others who might know quieter routes, cycle paths that you don't necessarily know about already. Walk the route first if that's helpful, or practice on a quieter day or time. So something like a Sunday morning is quite a nice time to practice routes if you just want to gain some confidence first. And I often find that something like you can use, obviously there's certain apps out there that have show more cycle paths rather than something like Google Maps, which I know in London Google Maps maybe takes you along places like canals, which aren't always the most quiet and calm places to cycle. So it's adjusting finding the route that you feel comfortable with. And equipment, I don't want to put like too much emphasis on the idea that we need to buy lots of things and flashy gear to be able to cycle. But just there's a few things that may help you feel seen and safer and therefore more confident. So obviously front and back lights, they are a must. You should legally have them at certain times of lighting, which will make you feel safer. Having a helmet makes often you feel safer and therefore more confident on the road. Comfortable clothing, and that for some people might be bright and reflective as well. And thinking about things like bags and panniers. I used to cycle personally with a rucksack, and then I started using a pannier, and I couldn't believe that I'd been cycling with a rucksack filled with lots of heavy stuff. So it just makes you feel a bit more comfortable. Okay, so thanks to you that are also sharing some tips on the chat box. That's all really useful for everyone. So just thinking about how we can communicate on the road to help communicate with other road users and pedestrians as well. So there's multiple things that we can do. So as cyclists, we can do hand signals. You can do this as much, it's helpful if you can do this as much as you can to make it clear which directions you are going, but you don't have to do this. Sometimes it's, the roads, many of you will know that there's potholes, there's obstructions, you need to brake. And if you don't feel confident to go and just have one hand on your bike, then don't. but try to therefore signal to other road users in other ways what you were going to do. So that might be looking over your shoulder, using eye contact to acknowledge that you've seen each other. And things like cycling with one hander, if you're not confident, maybe go and practice in a park or some quieter streets for a bit. But yeah, looking over shoulder is a really helpful one. I use that definitely a lot. And it really kind of signals to other road users that you are going to be moving out. And that eye contact really gives them reassurance. If you need to react quite quickly, particularly with pedestrians, I find that, yeah, a bell, if you have one, just says, "Hi, I'm here." It doesn't have to be sort of an angry, "Get out my way," but just that kind of helping each other, look out for each other. And obviously, if you can't react that quickly, just the verbal shout is sometimes quite helpful. So this hopefully will help build awareness between different road users, and respect for each other, because we don't want to have this divide of cyclists versus drivers versus motorcyclists. We've all got this kind of shared space, and it's nice to, yeah, respect each other, and hopefully this will make you feel more comfortable on the road, and yeah, just practice in different spaces first and then build up to busier, more difficult places. Now I'm going to go on to a bit about road positioning, and how being in certain places on the road can again make you feel safer and more seen and therefore more confident. So there's one thing that is like, there's this balance of being assertive and confident on the road, but also having some patience. I think particularly in sort of busier places and sort of city centres. So there's two positions that we can talk about, one being the primary position and the other being a secondary position. So a primary road position is the centre of your lane, and it's safer to be in that centre, and because it's more likely, you're more likely to be seen, and it helps to deter unsafe passes by other road users, particularly cars. And this is when you're moving with traffic. And then your secondary road position, you're slightly closer to the edge of the curb, but still give a good distance from it. So you still want to leave like a meter from the curb. So you don't want to be hugging it. This will still, because you need that meter to leave room for things like potholes, drains, broken glass, or any other hazards. And it gives you that space to still move if needed. And obviously, if appropriate, if the road is wide enough, it allows kind of safe overtaking if you are kind of slightly further over, because you should never feel like you are slowing somebody up or that you're in the way, as that can put you in danger and other people in dangers. Obviously, as you as a cyclist have the right to be on the road just as much as any other user. So again, maybe contrary to what inexperienced cyclists may think, as I said, you are often more safer in the middle of the lane, as it helps us to be seen. And so things like, again, if we're passing a row of cars, you want to be a good meter or so away from those parked cars, because obviously there's lots of things about them opening the car doors. So you need to be a good distance away from them and to react. Again, if you're coming up to a junction or a side road, that's when, again, I would move further out. So rather than being in your secondary position where you're about a meter from the curb or from the lane junction, move further out. And this is another one of those times that if there is a car pulling on in from the side road, you can be sort of ready to make eye contact with them to acknowledge each other. So here I have sort of an example of a T-junction. And we know that road positioning is a way of communicating to other drivers and helping drivers to understand what you're about to do next. And that can therefore affect driver behavior and discourage drivers from performing potentially dangerous maneuvers. There's lots of things about coming to a D-junction. I sometimes, because I've been cycling for quite a while, will just slow down and look and then carry on if it's safe to do so. But if you again don't feel confident to just slow down but keep moving, then obviously stop and put your feet down to give yourself that time. So I'm going to use the annotate function again. So if you want to go back to selecting a stamp, and then I'd like you to stamp on the T-junction where you would position yourself if you were turning right. So if you're coming up from the bottom of the screen and you're in so you want to be coming up in the left-hand lane and you're about to turn right. Perfect. Yeah, that's really good. So a lot of people that I again have seen or have gone out with to do these kind of confidence trainings, they feel like they're in the way, and sometimes people feel like they're in the way and always have to move over to the left hand side. So I'd maybe be waiting here to then turn and go right. But as you have clearly shown, that you ideally really want to be in the right hand side, and that really helps to show drivers what you're about to do. And if there was like one going straight across, then obviously, yeah, you'd be more central. If you were turning left, then stay on the left hand side, but it still gives my line there was quite close to the kind of edge, but give yourself some space to move out safely and not to hugging that curb again. And obviously, as you're approaching these junctions, give yourself plenty of time. Slowly, like kind of pull out to that right hand side of the lane in plenty of time. And again, remembering to kind of look over your shoulder or use your hand where possible. So just clearing all of those annotate functions. Then, as I say, a lot of you are cycling in towns and cities. So we'll see that you have, maybe you have cycle lanes, maybe you're seeing different types of cycle lanes put in. Some of you might not have them in your towns and cities or other locations that you're cycling. But just remembering that they'll see really useful sometimes, and we may feel safer in them, and sort of further away from the traffic, and they might be smoother and help us move through traffic a lot quicker. But just remembering that you don't always have to be in the cycle lane. So if actually it's safe for you to come out of it, then do feel confident to do that. And often those kind of lines of the cycle lanes are more instructions for drivers. So a solid and like these solid and dashed white lines give basically different instructions. So a dashed white line means that a car can come in to the cycle lane if they feel like they really need to, and pause for a brief moment, just to kind of move around another road user. But a solid white line means that a car driver or other motor user should never be in that cycle lane. And also, if you is one of these paths that is cycled with pedestrians, then the pedestrian really has the right of way there. And again, that kind of solid white line means that you should not be moving into the pedestrian lane. So these are some places that you can go to get more resources and ideas. So there's Cycling UK, Bikeability, and they do lots of cycle confidence trainings in person, sort of linking up with local councils. So you can look out for those. And I think they're restarting them again soon, or yeah. And then there's a website as well called Bike is Best. So I'm going to, so Carol says I think we'll start in 5 minutes on the bike maintenance. But has anyone got any questions for the next 5 minutes that they would like to ask? I'm just going to read, I've got one that says, what would you recommend for road positioning on a large roundabout with multiple lanes, like the one at Waterloo IMAX? Again, I know that one well. The highway code describes cyclists skirting the edge of a roundabout, but I found that downright dangerous and impossible to maneuver to the exit I want. And so it's one of those things that I need to know, think about which direction you're coming from and yeah, the place you want to exit, because I know that again, the IMAX roundabout is one of these things that there is lots of lane changes. So when there's multiple lanes, if there's a cycle lane, then try and stay in that and follow that, because sometimes they do guide you nicely around the roundabout and giving you the opportunity to exit where needed. But again, that isn't always easy. So you do have to go into you do have to swap lanes slightly. So I think it's just taking it gently and slowly, using again hand signals and looking over your shoulder where possible to really make it clear what you're doing. And maybe practice it a couple of times, observe what other, I mean, sometimes it's not useful to observe what other road cyclists are doing, but sometimes it is really helpful if you think that they look like they're confident and do it a lot. But for these, it's hard to give the explicit when you kind of need to be there in person to know the different entrance and exits. So yeah, multi-lane roundabouts being a big, kind of one of the big scary ones. What else would I recommend for those? Obviously, if anyone else has got any other tips, please do. You can turn on your microphone if you feel comfortable with sharing. Otherwise, share in the chat box. Because some multi-lane ones are broken up that you can't go the whole way around at once. They are broken up by traffic lights. It makes it easier to take it in separate stages. But if you were going all the way around, I would use it like a car driver. So if I'm going all the way around, I would move over into the right-hand lane. But if I was taking a first exit or a second exit, stay in sort of the left-hand lane. But definitely looking over your shoulders, eye contact is really important there. What is best to do if you have a large vehicle behind you that is coming into the cycle box at a traffic light junction? So it's behind you. So this again, you should never feel like you are in the way. And if you can tell it's coming up behind you, I would look over your shoulders and try and really look at that driver. Because obviously, you should be safe in the cycle box, and it's always good to get into the cycle box where possible. So if you're coming up to a junction and the traffic light is on red and the traffic is built up, if you can safely either move on the left-hand side in the cycle lane to get to the front, then that's a good thing to do. If you can't really move up on the left-hand side, and you know those traffic lights well, and you think, okay, they're not going to change for a while, or before I get to the front, then you can move up on the right-hand side. And obviously, yeah, it's sometimes safer to move and overtake on the right hand side and get to that front box. But if you feel like, yeah, you can look behind and show them that you were there, then that's a good thing to do. So I'm going to hand over to Carolus, and then if there's more questions about sort of the cycle confidence or about his bike maintenance section, we'll have some chance for some more questions after those. So,
hello everyone. Just to double check if you can hear me or not, because I've been having some trouble with the computer.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Nice, that's great. So just in case if the sound does disappear, which it might happen, because I've just been seeing a lot of, the computer has been on fire with kind of, if there's Zoom and something else on, somehow the computer is not able to handle it. So yeah, just in case if you're not able to hear it, just ping a message and I will try my best. Maybe I could connect to another Zoom, through another Zoom person and talk through my phone, and then use the video on, kind of use the computer as the video if possible. So yeah, my name is Carolus. I work in Bike for Good in Glasgow. We run a charity that does many, many, many things, including bike upcycling, teaching people skills and cycling, and doing something similar what I'm doing today, classes online and classes in person. We do have a large workshop of people working with bikes and repairing them every day. We have various projects happening through the shop, and we kind of have a outreach team that goes out and tries to engage with people that would like to learn about cycling or any other skill to do with cycling. So yeah, a really busy hub that has about 50 people working here. It's like almost like a large beehive that is continuously running about in Glasgow and outside of it, trying to help everybody that has anything to do with bikes. So yeah, that's been, I've been working for this organization for 10 years. We started from a really tiny workshop in the east end of Glasgow, and somehow through kind of years of building the idea of what we would like to be, we finally kind of managed to come and acquire a huge warehouse and build a massive beehive of cyclists, which works pretty well. So today we're going to cover a puncture repair kit, or puncture repair, and after that puncture repair, we'll do an M check, which is how to safety check your bicycle before a bike ride, or maybe before let's say a longer distance cycling. And that's something you can use every day or maybe every second day, and of course show that to others, because it's really basic, really easy to remember, and we'll go from there. Sorry, I have been interrupted. Cool. So I will try to share a screen just for kind of the beginning, because I think, yeah, actually just to let you know, this is my first Zoom class. Usually I do classes in person, but yeah, so kind of, I'm on a meeting, sorry. Cool, sorry about that. We'll try to share screen. There we go. Nice one. Cool. Again, just double check. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, you're all good.
Yay! That's great. Sorry, I'm just panicking just in case I start glitching, and yeah, there's going to be a lot of misinformation. Okay, so I presume if you haven't fixed a puncture in the past, you will have to. That's something that is really, that's something that will happen or happens all the time. And probably you sometimes feel infuriated going to a bike shop and waiting a large queue of people just to get your tube repaired in order to be able to cycle. So what I'm going to go through today is give you a little bit of details about different wheel sizes, different types of tubes, kind of different ways of trying to fix it, and then maybe different types of punctures that you get, because sometimes some punctures are easier to repair and some punctures are really hard to repair because they might have multiple holes in the tube, and of course sometimes you might have a tubeless setup where your wheel, your tire and your wheel does not have a tube inside. It just has fluid, and that sometimes can be really messy when you fix. So I think what you can see through my screen is a few different sizes of wheels, and in a way how to kind of guesstimate the diameter, because that's something, if you have ever been in a bike shop saying, hey, I need to buy a tube, of course, what the mechanic will ask you is, what size of a tube do you need? And that's in a way, quite often you will see on your wheel, maybe if we go a little bit lower, you'll see more detail about it. So the tire has always the size written on the tire. So, and then there's a few different ways of how to calculate that, but we'll not go into detail for that because it's really, we'll go a really basic way. Cool. So we have a little common wheel sizes in inches. So that's something, like what I said before, if you come to a bike shop, and you want to buy a tube, is it for a kid's bike or for an adult sized bike, you would have to look at the side of the tire. Yeah, around some, on the diameter of the tire. And usually you will be able to find, a number. Quite often there's various numbers because the tires try to suit, each country. In UK you go by inches, somewhere else they go by centimeters or other small calculations. Now, so when we have an inner tube has quite often two different valves, and you'll see here we have a very skinny valve with a little kind of with a little screw on, and we have a valve that's called a Schrader, or what people quite often use is a car valve. So usually a standard for the car valve. So yeah, so Presta usually goes on a lot narrower wheels, for example, like a road wheel, because they are a really high pressure valve. So imagine this valve is able to hold a lot more pressure than the car valve. And then we have a Schrader, which is kind of a lot like commonly used everywhere. I think majority of kids' bikes have it, a lot of mountain bikes have it, and of course cars have it too. So that's something that's a bit more common and maybe easier to inflate if you don't have a pump, because you could jump into a car garage and ask for inflation. Cool. So as I mentioned before, the tire sidewall information. So like sometimes when you go to a bike shop to purchase a tube, you're thinking, oh, what size of a tube do I need? And if you look at your tire, or at least around on the bead of your tire, which is the bead would be here, kind of the actual sidewall of the tire, you will be able to see, again, it could be a combination of numbers, or could be like a fairly standard number as we have in a picture, 700 by 37, which, and that when you buy a tube, usually the tube comes in kind of in a few sizes because the tubes can expand. So let's say as you have this one, it says 700 by 35 to 43. So that is approximately, this tube could fit this kind of the sizings of tires in this range. So, and the same as quite often on the sidewall, you get the size of the tire. Quite often you will have information of how much the tire should be inflated. And so sometimes you have a few different a few different ways that it can be expressed. Is a PSI, so a pound per square inch, and then you have a bar, which is, again, I'm not really using ever bars, never kind of calculated bars, so, but at least there is an approximate size how that means. But if you look at any pump in a shop, or if you have a floor pump with the actual guide on it that allows you to kind of to see how much pressure you have, like how much you have inflated your tire, yeah, usually you'll be able to go by that. And then, yeah, if you look at your site, like even if we finish the class today, that's something you could do today, is actually look at your tire and look at the actual information that the tire is giving you. So you'll see here, that's quite strict information, right? Only at these tire pressure ratings, which I think majority of people never do. So yeah, you'll see that the first part of it, it says between 35 to 65 psi. So that really kind of depends, what I usually explain to people really depends on what sort of road are you, like road or tarmac or canal path are you cycling more likely. So imagine if your route is more on road, you would aim to have the highest psi possible, that you would reduce the rolling resistance on the road. And then if you're cycling a little bit on the canal path, maybe more potholes and kind of a bit more, I'll just be kind of maybe more countryside roads, you would like to have something between 35 and maybe 45. That just allows you to have a little bit kind of a little bit softer tire that doesn't have such a large impact from maybe roots or a pothole and stuff like that. That kind of gives you a little bit small suspension, almost like that. Cool. And then you see the bars and you will see the KPI, which I completely have never used and would not even understand which number, what it means. But as I say, pumps usually have PSI and the bar on it. And that's easy enough to see if you're using a floor pump. If you're not using a floor pump, my usual advice is inflate the tire as much as you can, because there's a boundary to where the hand pump will not be able, you will not be able to push anymore. And I rarely seen a hand pump that would be able to inflate the tire to the needed PSI. Cool. Just another example of how to read the information. So you have a little example of the size of the tire. So 27.5 by 2.8. So that's kind of 27.5 is the diameter of the wheel, and the 2.8 would be the thickness of the tire. And then you have, of course, the maximum PSI you can inflate this tire with. So yeah, if you look at every tire, I think even the cheapest tire has that. Usually somewhere, maybe not very clearly written, you'll be able to find this information of how much to inflate your tire or what size of a tube you would need. Cool. Okay. So yes, maybe show you how sometimes wheels can be attached to your bike. So probably the most common one is wheel nuts. So that's something, if you would like let's say you got a puncture on your wheel and you have wheel nuts on it, you're potentially going to have to carry a spanner with you for that particular wheel nut size. Most common one is a 15 millimeter spanner, and then sometimes on the older bikes you get a 13 or a 14 on the front wheel. So imagine that means your kit just becomes a little bit bigger when you have to what you have to carry with yourself. Then we have a quick release axle. That's potentially now on the most common kind of new purchased bicycles from a shop. You'll find that a majority of wheels come with quick releases. And then we have kind of something similar to a quick release, which is a security quick release with a tool. So imagine you would have kind of something similar like a through axle, but rather than having a lever, you would have a kind of a key, a specific key to unlock the wheel. Sometimes it's with just an Allen key, and sometimes it has a specific key. They can be annoying because you might forget it, you might not have it with you, and in the bike shop they will not be able to remove that, or they might have to break the actual security QR for you in order to remove that. So yeah, just kind of again to be cautious if you're having security QRs. Yeah, make sure you have the key, and maybe make sure you have a spare key because it's a thing easy enough to lose. And then of course on the a little bit more advanced bicycles, we have a through axle, which is usually used on a kind of mountain bikes or gravel bikes, something that has extremely fat tire and needs to have extremely fat tire and a lot of very little rolling resistance that you could just fly across the gravel and the tree trunks and stuff like that. Cool. I mean, and actually the module that I'm using just now, so that's something we will eventually release as Bike for Goods, and hopefully you'll be able to have all of this information that I'm showing you today through this module, that you'll be able to actually have a look and use that with me. Sorry, with me. Yeah, with yourself. Sorry. Cool. Just come back. I think that's nice one. So just to double check with you, Zoe, am I on the screen or am I not?
Yep, so you stop sharing your screen so everyone can see, you should be able to see you in person.
Yep. I'll just double check if people can see me.
Got some thumbs up, so yeah, I think everyone can see you.
Nice. Cool, that's great. So now that's something that's going to be fairly hard. I'm going to try and demonstrate to you how to fix a puncture through a camera. I mean, usually when we do a course, of course, usually it's a hands-on course. I demonstrate, and then people, I demonstrate how to remove a tube from a tire, or maybe even showing how to remove a wheel first from the bike, and then how to inspect the tire, how to find the thing that maybe made a puncture or caused the puncture for you, and then show you, sorry, how to fix the actual puncture. I mean, something that I think I missed, just quickly try and find it for you. There we go. Okay, so we'll just go through really, like, we'll just, now I'll cover a few more little things like different types of punctures and kind of, things that might cause issues as a, might cause issues for having a puncture. Go 2 seconds, gonna share my screen again. Nice one. There we go. So just to kind of show you a few different puncture types, so you'll see here. So that's something, quite a common thing if your tire pressure is very low and your tires are fairly soft. Imagine quite a squidgy bike. You kind of quite often might, even if you hit a pothole or a curb, you might even hear a little ding, like hitting your rim or your wheel. And that's, imagine, so the pinch, what we call a pinch flat, which is you get a little pinch and you get 2 holes instead of 1. And then sometimes people call it a snake bite because, yeah, snakes have 2 teeth and you kind of make a double hole in your tube. And that's something that might cause a little bit more issue. Imagine sometimes the hole could be, a little bit more far apart. That might cause an issue, as you might have to put 2 patches, and 2 patches not always work. And then, because it's harder to put them together and kind of make them seal. And sometimes, of course, if they're fairly close to each other, you could use, a fairly large patch if it's in your kit. I'll go through the tools a little bit later on, what we're going to use for that. Then we have a blowout. As you can see, the blowout quite often happens through the seam of the tube, and commonly caused by overinflation. So, imagine you have overinflated your tire and it just couldn't bear the pressure and just blew out. And quite often when that blows out, and you can see quite a large hole here, that actually takes the tire with it. So usually makes a hole in the tire because of that, such a strong pressure and kind of like really concentrated hole. When that pressure comes out, usually makes a hole in the tire as well. And of course makes you fairly deaf for a moment. You're kind of really confused and being like, what happened here? Because it sounds like a gunshot almost. Cool, we have another issue. So what we have here, so you'll see here, we have a rim. So, and on the rim, we have this lovely tape that protects the kind of the tube and the tire from all these holes, which are called spokes or nipples in here. So there's I'd say a valve hole, usually where the valve would enter. And quite what often happens when you remove the tire from the wheel, that rim tape itself could maybe misplace itself, or maybe get squished somewhere in a corner, and one of these holes could get exposed. And imagine what happens if that gets exposed. You inflate your tire or your tube, and actually you might get a blowout, because quite often these little edges around on the rim are really sharp because they've just been machined, never filed. So yeah, quite often they can create another puncture. And then of course, well, so another problem with the tubes can happen is when I don't think so. We have a picture in here, but I can explain it easily. Is when sometimes when you fit your tube into your wheel and the valve goes in for the hole. And imagine if you put the actual valve for the hole on a large angle, or like a really angled, not really a straight kind of fitting. That angle could cause the valve to kind of say erupt or kind of have a tear. And then if you ever have a valve core leak, what we call a little bit further here, valve core leak could be a really slow puncture as well. It could be a tiny hole, but then quite often that tube is not repairable anymore. You might have to replace the tube. And the same so the valve core leak could cause a valve to separate from the tube, which of course you're gonna lose air rapidly, and you're not gonna be able even to cycle. So that of course you're gonna have to buy a new tube rather than to repair it. Awesome. Yeah, and of course the most common one is when something goes through your tire. So that's maybe when we have the nails for the tire in here. It's maybe quite a drastic one. So maybe that's somebody shot with a nail gun at you, but quite common you'll find yourself there's a piece of glass or a thorn or a staple or something else that office people walk about and throw in the air in the city, which is quite surprising. And yeah, you'll come across all these little sharp small pieces of metal or thorns or glasses, so glass that will penetrate your tire and will cause a puncture. But they're of course a lot easier to find, and I'll show you ways how to find these little things sticking in your tire and how to clean them.
And Carolus, we have a question. Someone says, how often should you renew inner tubes regardless of punctures?
I mean, from my perspective, as being a place where we recycle things and try to keep everything as long as possible, I would say, I mean, we sometimes get bicycles donated from 70s, and those tubes are still in really good condition. So I would continuously use it to the point. I mean, okay, from my experience, I have fixed a tube, I think about 15 times. So I had 15 patches on my tube. And the idea of that was to see how far could I go with one inner tube, and how far could I repair this inner tube that I could, to save it as long as possible. So that was about 15 patches, and some of the patches were on top of each other because the, puncture holes were next to each other. And then, one day I just gave up and I was like, okay, I think 15 times repairing a tube is really enough. Is that a good answer to the question? Cool. So just to kind of continue with the tools that we use. So we have two types of kind of repair kits. So one is self-vulcanizing and one is self-adhesive. So self-vulcanizing one is probably the most common puncture repair kit that, and as you can see, it comes with a little cute box. It has different sizes of patches. It has a little tub of glue and has a little bit of sanding paper. And quite often what other puncture repair kits add is a little crayon and a little bit of chalk. So that's something not in this kit, touche. So yeah, and so what you have, so I mean, we'll go through the process anyway. What is the idea of fixing that and how to do that? Then of course we have lovely tire levers. I mean, so as you can see, metal tire levers have been crossed out because that's something that quite often creates a dent or a scratch on your wheel, and that really could make actually a sharp edge again that will persist in giving you punctures, or you might even cut your hand. And of course, I think people are already thinking about it. Is like, can I use spoons? And do not use spoons, because I think spoons were made to eat with, not to fix punctures. Though I would say if you're stuck and you have nothing to do, like you cannot find a tire lever and the only thing you come across is a spoon, I mean, to be fair, I would use a spoon if needed.
But yeah, I would recommend to use plastic tire levers because they do not damage your wheel, and they're a lot easier to use. As you can see, they have little gaps that you can kind of lock the tire lever on, and yeah, it's a lot easier. And if it's, sometimes you do have a really like a hard tire that is really hard to remove from the wheel. And you know what I like about plastic levers, they will rather snap than make a dent or a bend on your wheel. So yeah, and I'd rather buy a new pair of tire levers than buying a new wheel. Cool. Now a few different pumps. So of course we have, as I mentioned before, we have something that is a floor pump. So the large pump in the middle. So the large pump, you'll see it has a little like a gauge in the bottom of it that tells you how much pressure you have, like how much pressure you have placed in your tire, which is great. Has a little bit, kind of a little long, not entirely sure how to even call this. I'll call it a noodle, something that you can, you know, have a bit of distance and you don't really need to kneel in front of the wheel. And of course we have the hand pump, and hand pumps really depend on the quality that you have. You know, if you buy a really cheap hand pump, of course you're going to get very little air, or you're going to have to, you know, it's going to be almost like an exercise machine. You know, you do get sweaty when you're trying to inflate your tire, even up to 35 psi, which is kind of a bare minimum. So, and that kind of gives you, you know, like, yeah, I would say it's a good exercise, you know. And then where the floor pump, of course, you're putting the pressure on the floor, like through the floor, with holding the pump with your feet, just makes it a lot easier and a lot faster. And of course, that's what, you know, every bike shop uses if they're not using an electric one. And then of course we have one that has a pack of CO2, or sorry, O2, I think, if not mistaken. Was it? Yeah, it's CO2, sorry, cartridge. Yeah. So imagine that is quite often used for tubeless, what I mentioned before. So imagine like a wheel that does not have a tube inside. It has like a sealant or a liquid, and that gives you kind of a really rapid, quick inflation to your wheel. You could actually even overinflate if you're not careful enough. But yeah, that's something works really well. If you imagine you're coming out for a long distance cycling, you're doing like, let's say, a sportive of 120 miles, and you need a really quick kind of inflation, that could be your thing that you could carry with yourself. But again, weight and other little unnecessary things. But it does help a lot. Awesome. So what we're going to try to do now, I'll hopefully try and do a puncture there. So you can see there's a lot of information to cover the M check, which is actually quite informative as well. So there we go. So I'm just going to read a few questions if I haven't missed.
So do you want me to, so I've given you one of them, and then the other one is, so can you take a road bike on stony paths with a few bumps so that it won't damage the wheel?
I mean, you can. I mean, definitely cycle that a lot, and sometimes wheels do suffer from that, but I would say it really depends on how gravelly the ride is. Like if it's really large stones, I think you might struggle because the wheels could even get stuck between the stones. And then in the end, you're not going to be able to cycle fast on it as well. So if you're cycling carefully, and sometimes if you're cycling 3 miles an hour, I think easy to jump off the bike and walk with it than cycling 3 miles an hour. But I just say it's a great experience comparing to, and that's something that's you will, and it really depends on how much pressure in the tires you have as well. So if it's really soft tires, imagine on a forest path, it's good because of such a skinny tire, your wheels will suffer. Cool. Let's try to fix this puncture. So one thing that I will not cover is how to remove a wheel from a bike, which I would definitely suggest for you if you have never removed a wheel off a bike. Even I would suggest to start off maybe practicing with the front wheel, And of course, particularly if you have a quick release, it's a little bit easier. And then if not, I would definitely watch a few YouTube videos. There's hundreds of them now because, you know, everybody's looking for bike repairs. And I think kind of YouTube is skyrocketing with people doing things at home. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of videos how to remove a wheel and how to place the wheel back. So the front wheel, of course, is easy because, you know, it's fairly basic. You just need to unhook the brake and then hook it back once the wheel is back on it. Of course, with the rear wheel, you'll have a little bit more struggle because you have the rear derailleur with the chain and the gears there. So that's something you might have to kind of practice a few times to kind of in order to work out the best way of doing it. And quite often I find it, I mean, if you get a rear puncture, you know, it's easy enough to put your bicycle upside down and maybe try and practice with that. But then of course you can see my bike is on the stand. It's like almost the lazy way, you know, it's not the best example, you know, because usually if you get a puncture, you usually get a puncture on the road and you're going to have to try and repair it. Well, quite often I suggest to people, if, you know, imagine you have I mean, I live in Glasgow and it's raining every second day. So it's not glorious every day to, you know, and sometimes and actually quite often you will get a puncture on the worst day possible. And I usually carry a spare tube with me just in case I would not have to stand in the rain, in the freezing cold, trying to fix a puncture. That really gives you a bad experience in cycling. And so I usually carry with myself a spare tube that I would quickly replace one rather than sitting on the road trying to put a patch. Cool. So I mean, we'll start off fairly basic. Imagine we have already removed the wheel from remove the wheel from the bike, and even if you have a puncture, you know, imagine that the air has completely came out from your tire, but quite often there's still a little bit of air left. So first suggestion is to kind of make sure the tube is completely empty. So what I use for that, either quite often so I'm going to be fixing a Schrader one, so which is like the car valve. So it's a little bit harder to use than the Presto one. So I'm just going to use a bit of a spanner or a tire or an edge. Yeah, or like an edge of the tire lever. And I'm just going to put that inside. And just make sure that all the air is out from the tire. As well, do have in mind, sometimes you could have a really tiny puncture, like so tiny that the air is leaking out, like, you know, it takes a week for it to go out. So that's something that, you know, you might even think you're crazy because you inflated your tires on Monday and by Sunday, somehow your tires are empty and you're like, what is going on? So quite often you might have a really tiny puncture, and that just, you know, I find them quite driving mad because, yeah, it's really hard to find it. And then quite often you think like, why do I have to inflate my tires so often? Cool. So I removed all the air, so my tire is really soft. You see, it's really, I can move it about now. It's not staying in shape. So as I mentioned before, I have two tire levers, same ones we showed you before. Nice Pedro's tire levers. They're really strong and powerful. So what I'm gonna do first, so imagine when I take a wheel, so what I do, I actually do kind of a little bit of visual check. So I go over kind of the top, you know, the kind of, the bit that kind of touches the surface of the road. So, and I kind of look around it just to see, is there anything large sticking out? Is there a thorn or a staple or a piece of glass? So I'm just slowly, imagine turning the wheel like round and just kind of visually inspecting the actual. You could potentially go and squish, like imagine if I'm having the tire, you could take a little squish to it, and then imagine that kind of, you know, you could see the holes in the tire and to see like, is there anything hiding in that little hole, like a piece of glass. That usually is most common. So yeah, you go around, I would definitely suggest to go out even a few times just to kind of make sure there's nothing large sticking through it. Cool. So I cannot really see anything. So really, one really important thing that people do not think of doing is actually kind of squeezing. So imagine we have the side of the tire, and I'm kind of pushing that side of the tire, trying to kind of push it more to the other side of the wheel. And that kind of allows the wheel to unstick or unglue itself, because imagine, yeah, because of the kind of material it is made, or maybe you have never had a puncture for 4 years and that tire has been there. Quite often they do stick to each other, and that makes it a little bit harder to take off. So I do make sure that I kind of unstick the side of the tire from the side wheel. And the same with the other side. There we go. So that's kind of made sure that it's all unglued, it's kind of nice and fairly loose. I mean, quite often some tires are fairly loose. You could remove them by hand if you have really strong thumbs, and if not, I mean, as I said before, use the spoons for the last resort, even if you cannot get tire levers. So we have two lovely tire levers. Try and come a bit closer. I love the tire levers. So you'll see the tire lever has like a little hook. Let's see, can I show it a bit better? There we go. It has a little hook, and then has a little place where it can click on the spoke. So I'll show you if possible. There we go. So imagine I'm going to pull the tire, kind of almost opening up the tire, and I'm going to put the lever to kind of hook the tire together. And in a way, there we go. One tire lever is hooked in. I'm going to do the same thing, pull the tire apart, stick my tire lever in it, and kind of pull the tire in. So you'll see, yeah, so the hooking bits are underneath the tire now, and they're kind of slowly peeling the tire off the rim. So I'll do it the same. So, and you just kind of go around and try to do it a bit further, a little bit further. And you'll see there's quite often a point that the tire has loosened off, and what you can do, you could just slide the tire lever around, and there we go. And we have one side of the tire off. You can see the tube is already exposed. So yeah, so what we always do, we try to remove one side of the tire first, because if you're trying to remove them both, that will create a lot of pressure and the tire will not come off, and you're going to be raging at it. Cool. So now when one side of the tire is loose, if you're doing a roadside repair, I would probably not bother removing the tire off the wheel. But if you're doing it at home and you're relaxed with a cup of tea, I would definitely, I would just remove the tire off the wheel, which I'm going to do anyway. But yeah, if you're on a roadside repair, you're probably just going to remove the inner tube. You can see it slowly coming out. Inner tube from the tire. And of course, the last one is the valve. There we go. So yeah, so this is the way you would have it. So imagine you have one side of the tire still on the rim, and then the one side of the tire is off. Cool. Just to kind of double check, is everybody okay? And is everybody able to see?
Yeah, can definitely see and hear you clearly.
Nice, that's cool. Just to make sure that I'm not talking to myself, because that has happened in the past. Cool. Now we're left just with the tube. So we looked around the tire. We couldn't see anything sticking inside of it. Outside of it. What you could do. So the best thing to do now is, as I said, when I fix, usually I remove the tire off the wheel, and what that does, I kind of have a better handle of it. So what I do, the first thing I would do. So, we've done the visual on the outside, and I'm going to do the kind of check in the inside. So, I'm going to look at the inside of the tire. And then rather than actually looking for it, I'm actually going to use my fingers, and I'm going to slide my fingers really carefully on that kind of surface of the surface of the tire, and try to see, is there anything I can feel that is sticking inside, like a piece of glass again, or a little, some kind of shard or a metal or something like that. So just, really carefully, not kind of like, going mad at it. You're trying really carefully, just sliding your fingers across this kind of the inside surface. And you'll always find, like, there's always something little hiding inside of them. So there you go, found a little piece of stone that I just removed. Yeah, so just sliding the inside of the tire,
trying to feel if there's anything sticking out, and then you'll see 80% of that, there's something usually there. And then quite often you might need a pokey tool, something a little bit sharpish that you could, put it inside and remove it. Sometimes it comes off just by giving a little push. If it's a thorn, you don't want to stab your finger, so just kind of, be careful. Maybe take a pair of pliers. And so I have inspected the tire. Let's say I found a little piece of shard that's sticking through it. I have removed it with pliers or maybe by hand if it was possible. There we go, another piece of stone. And now I'm sure that my tire is okay. And I'm going to put my tire in. Cool. Now we have a lovely tube. As you can see, it's flat. It's kind of not holding the shape. So my best advice for this is, of course, once again, you could do a visual check for it, to see, kind of going around the tube and seeing, maybe you can visually see if there's a large hole, unless it's like a really tiny hole, or something like it's been leaking slowly out. You could just, just to see if there's nothing still there. But easiest way to find the puncture. Okay, 2 seconds, I forgot my pump. There we go. Sorry about that. So yeah, so you would take your valve and you would attach your pump to it. So I'm using a floor pump, so it will be a little bit easier. And what you're doing usually, you're inflating the tire fairly a lot actually. I would do probably, so you can see now the tube is holding its shape. And I would overinflate the tube slightly, and imagine that pressure from overinflation would kind of force the air out through the hole. And what you could do then, so imagine I would start off from the valve. So there's the valve here. And I would start from the valve, kind of using my face area. So usually a bit of my ear and a bit of my lips, because they are fairly sensitive to air. And I would be listening and at the same time trying to feel if there's any air coming out from like a little spot or a little hole from the tire. So you can see, I look exactly the same. I would be doing this, like, whoa. Yep, I would be going around and just kind of listening, and at the same time trying to feel with my lips, because as you'll find that your lips feel air so well. So yeah, just going around it slowly and trying to see where is the puncture. Quite often, if you already find that the pump, like as this has been repaired, probably, wow, as it's counting now, 6, yep. No, 4 times. So this tube has been repaired 4 times. So yeah, quite often what happens with that, you might get, like one of the patches maybe have unglued themselves, and they're just the same puncture you had before. But yeah, as this looks, it's not. Cool. So let's say I have found my puncture, a little hole in here. Probably you're not gonna hear it. So it is a little hole. It's not leaking out air completely. So I'm gonna have to remove, what air I have placed into the tube. I'm gonna do that. Cool. A bit more. So yeah, you're trying to kind of deflate the tube, that it would be nice and loose without any air inside of it, because that just makes it a little bit harder to repair. But if it's really empty, you'll see it's a lot easier to repair the tube when the air is completely out of it. Now, as we spoke about the repair kits, so this repair kit that I have has tire levers inside of it, nice tire levers. Woo. We have glue, which is nice. We have the repair kit, kind of the patches for it, which come weirdly enough all in the same size, but that's okay. And then we have a little bit of sanding paper. So that's going to be the first thing that we're going to use is sanding paper. And sanding paper works really simple. So imagine sanding paper is something that you roughen up an area. So this is my puncture here, and what I usually do, I kind of take my hand and I wrap the tube around on my hand, and imagine in the middle of my hand, there's the puncture here. So I see, and imagine when you give a little bit of pressure, when you pull the tube kind of together, that hole gets exposed a little bit more, and that means you visually can see it a bit better. So you have a sanding paper, which majority of puncture kits will come with, and I'm gonna sand like a, imagine if that's the size of the patch, I will probably sand let's say double the size of that patch. Just makes it a little bit easier and kind of less. So yeah, so I'm roughing up the area. So literally just taking the sandpaper, very carefully trying to make that area a little bit rougher. And the reason we do that for is firstly is cleaning, and secondly, when we put glue on that and the glue dries out, that kind of makes them bond a little bit better. So the glue and the kind of roughened up patch will allow the kind of better bonding with the patch and the tube. There we go, that's done. When sadly you can visually not really see it. Once again, it's kind of a shame, but that's all right. So what I would do now is I would put some glue on it. So, and the same as we did with the sanding paper, so I would put slightly bigger patch, like slightly bigger amount of glue than the actual patch. So we'll just kind of have, imagine if the patch is this size, we're gonna go a little bit more glue on the outside of that patch, and that kind of just helps. Because quite often you might put a little bit less than the patch. So imagine one corner of the patch is not going to stick properly, and that might just allow the air to leak out. Cool. So this patch, in general, this repair kit comes with vulcanizing glue, and what vulcanizing glue needs is a little bit of drying out. So it needs to get a little bit of oxygen, and that allows that to kind of become a little bit more, a little bit more sticky and less slidey. Imagine if I would put the patch on the nicely kind of wet blob of glue, that patch potentially will, it's not going to stick. It's not going to stick to the actual glue. It's just going to slide about, and it might even take longer for it to dry out. And of course, once you want to make sure that the glue is nicely kind of spread out, not just like one big blob on the puncture. Cool. So, I mean, usually I advise people to wait about 5 to 10 minutes. I mean, the advice on the paper that you will see in the puncture repair kit is 1 minute. I never trust that. But at the same time, yeah, you can even give a little blow. You'll see that usually the glue dries out a little bit. So, nice one. Cool. So I've separated to one patch now. So give a little minute, and you can actually, slightly touch with your finger just to see, is it still wet or is it already becoming kind of nice and dry that you could put your patch on. So in here, I would say looks pretty good. I will attempt to fit the patch. So what happens when you take it apart? So you'll see that usually patch comes with a little bit of foil. Let's see if I can do a bit better. A little bit of foil, so kind of like patch has a little bit of foil and has a little plastic sleeve. And when you pull them apart, the plastic sleeve takes the patch together. There we go. In a way, I will leave that plastic kind of around it, and I will remove that only when the patch has completely, got stuck onto the tire. So there you go. Another check. Yeah, my glue feels pretty dry. So now imagine, the blob of glue that I placed, imagine in the middle of that blob is the puncture. So that hole, the hole that made the air to leak out. So what I'm going to do, so I'm going to aim for the patch to be right in the middle of that hole. It's right on it. So once you put it on, you'll see that, because the glue has dried out, the patch is not sliding now. It's actually just sticking right where it should be, and it's not sliding. And usually if you leave the glue wet, you'll see when you put the patch and you try to squeeze like really tightly. So imagine now I'm using my thumb and I'm actually squishing that patch onto the tire, nice and tight, just kind of trying to remove the air bubbles if there's any, and just trying to make sure that that patch is sticking to the tube. So imagine this has taken me about 10 minutes already, and that you would be on the road doing this for 10 minutes. I mean, usually I know that in London, the summers are quite nice. Sadly, in Glasgow, we're not so fortunate all the time. So yeah, I would not like to stand outside in the middle of the road somewhere wet and unhappy fixing a puncture. Cool. So yeah, so one thing I'm doing, I'm really making sure that the patch has been, is really sticking with the tire. And for me, it looks like it's great. If I show you a bit closer, there we go. This is a tube patched, at least visually. There we go. So advice after that for me is that's something that my grandfather used to teach me. If you're at home, I would find something heavy and I would put something heavy on top of that, and kind of like, you want to cover the full surface of the patch, that you would make sure that it actually sticks properly to it. And my advice, usually wait at least 10 minutes whilst you do that. So imagine you pack it in, you put that together, and just allow the patch and the tube to kind of bond together for that 10 minutes. Cool, so we're gonna skip that 10 minutes, and imagine now I have my tire separate from the wheel, and I have my tube separate from the tire. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is kind of look at the tire, and quite often on the side of the tire, it tells you the rotation of the tire. So that means what way should it fit, what way should it be on the wheel in order that, that be the right way. Because some tires actually are really particular and they want to be fitted only one way. So you will see on the tire, quite often there's a little arrow saying rotation. This tire does not have that, so I can fit the tube from anywhere I want. So what I usually do, there's a few different types. If we left the tire on the wheel, you could just, open one side of the tire and start fitting the tube. Or what I usually do, I just put the tube, like putting the valve first, holding that place, and kind of feeding, slowly, just feeding that tube into the tire. You'll see one. There we go. That's kind of roughly, roughly the tube is in the tire. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take the valve. So the valve is here, and that's going to be the first contact with the wheel. So imagine I take my wheel. You'll see around, if you look around the wheel, there's my valve hole. So if you go with a full 360, there's the rim tape on the wheel. We'll make sure that that rim tape is covering all the spoke holes. None of the spoke holes are exposed. As I said before, you can damage the rim tape, and sometimes you might have to replace it. So yeah, there's my valve hole. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to put my finger on the valve hole just to kind of make sure. And here I'm holding the valve with, kind of two of my fingers here. So I'm in control. The first thing I'll do is I'm going to put the valve into the hole there, kind of squish it through. Sometimes it's quite stiff to do that. There you go. So the first contact was I have the valve through the valve hole on the wheel. Cool. So that's something that people jump always to do at once, is to fit the tire on the wheel without thinking. So you'll find yourself, maybe that's again a thing to practice is, do the wrong ways. Try to fit it wrong, that you would see all the wrong ways possible, and of course try to fit it right after that. So my advice is, because the tire has two sides, one side of the bead and the other side of the bead, you're going to try and fit one side at a time. So you're not fitting the tire at once, trying to squish it in. You're just fitting one side of the tire. And as you'll see in here, it's fairly easy. I'm not really, not really trying hard. Or maybe, there we go, a bit easier. Oh, yeah, and there you go. And there's some things that happen to you. Maybe the other side has slidden off, and that makes it a lot tighter to fit. But there we go. We'll try it again. So yeah, so now I have one side of the tire on the wheel, and I have just the other side of the wheel left now. So what I'm going to do there, a little bit kind of, just to make sure that the inner tube is kind of, in the middle of the tire and in the middle of the wheel. It wouldn't be kind of, like hanging out like this. So if you leave it like that, what you're going to do, you're going to probably pinch, make a little pinch on the tube, and you might have to repair the puncture again. Cool. So just to make sure everything's there, and now I'm going to start fitting the other. See if I can make it better. So I'm going to start fitting the other side. So I know that looks really simple. I do apologize. I did this for the last 10 years. My hands are adjusted to that. When you try it yourself, you'll see this a lot harder. So yeah, what usually happens, imagine like 90% of the tire has been fitted, and then usually you're left with this kind of one little hanging bit here. And that's what they find is quite often the hardest to fit. So ways out of it, you could use a tire lever and kind of maybe reversing the tire lever. So we're not, we're not taking it off now, we're gonna try to put it back. So you could kind of try and get it into the gap and trying to force the tire back on it. But quite often what they find the tire lever does, it goes inside and actually makes another puncture for you because it pinches the tube inside. So either be really, really careful just to make sure that you're not pinching the inner tube, or you might have to go to the bike shop because, yeah, from my personal experience, some tires even beyond my fingers, and they do have strong thumbs. Cool. So yeah, we have the last bit, and what I usually do, I use my hands, and imagine I'm pulling the tire, I'm like pulling the tire and forcing it to go over that last gap. There we go. We have fixed the puncture, and we have fitted the tube back on the wheel. And of course, what you would do now is grab a pump, inflate that, and make sure you and hope that the puncture does not persist. Cool. I hope you enjoyed that. That was quite an interesting experience to do on the camera rather than onto like a live, in person. Sorry, in person it works out a little bit kind of, like I could give feedback and I could, show little problems and kind of show different variations. But of course, for the camera, you kind of have to be really concise and be like, yep, this is what you do, this is what you don't do. And hopefully I have some of these things covered, and kind of little things that if you have little questions, of course, we can pass it on.
Yeah, thanks, Carolus. Yeah, obviously great to have you with us, and you did a good job for your first time on Zoom and doing a live kind of session over camera. And it was, yeah, I think we could see quite clearly what you were doing, and your instruction was really useful. So obviously some people have had to leave, unfortunately.
Yep,
but we've recorded the session, so we are able to upload it. But people that are still around, thanks for sticking with us. Do you have any questions that you would like to ask Carolus or myself, whether it's bits around bike maintenance or bike confidence?
Yeah, and at the same time, Zoe, like if you still have some information you would like to get, like we could, again, the module that we're working on, it's, something that we potentially will be able to share with people. And that will be like a lot of like really simple kind of explained in a really simple way, not really kind of, high-tech mechanically based, but yeah, kind of really simple, understandable way. And it goes like almost like a course, basic, a bit more advanced, and et cetera, et cetera. That information, hopefully, we will be able to release fairly soon, and we'll definitely share that with you.
Super, thanks, Carolus. And as you can see on the screen now is Bike for Good's website, and also the Green Impact website. So if you want to find out a bit more information about either of those things or get in contact with anyone, there's some details there. But once again, thank you so much for joining, and keep cycling. And yeah, there's lots of resources out there to kind of support you and speak to others as well, to share your own ideas and tips and help some others feel more confident on the road and doing bits of bike maintenance. So thanks and enjoy the rest of your week.
Bye-bye.